This week on The Travel Detective. Think you're sailing on a brand new cruise ship? Well, you might want to think again. That ship may have sailed under different names and different companies for decades. We'll look at the notorious past lives of some cruise ships. That's in our cover story.
The only people that are missing anything are the people that don't know the history of the ship.
Plus, we discover the hidden gems of Beijing and how at least some of ancient China is being preserved.
No factory.
Not a single factory involved.
没有工厂 Nope.
Nope, I got the no part.
And what happens when an airline switches your seat? And how do you fight back?
I'm Peter Greenberg. Those stories and more in this week's edition of The Travel Detective. I'm standing in front of a brand new ship, the Norwegian Breakaway. New ship, new name. But let's define the word new because it doesn't always apply to a ship that's promoted as new. Some of these ships have an amazing past, and some of them are quite bizarre. We've all seen images of ship christenings. A champagne bottle smashed against the hull, and a brand new vessel launched into the sea. But what happens to that once new ship 5, 10, or 15 years later? In many cases, it's sold from one cruise line to another. It gets renamed and then reincarnated again and again, and often promoted as a new ship. Take the historic ship, the SS France.
A $60 million craft will carry 2,000 passengers.
At the time of construction in 1960, she was the longest passenger ship ever built.
Super, super modern with a very large tourist class and a very large first class with the best food in the world. And she was so expensive to operate that she needed a subsidy from the French government.
On her maiden voyage, movie stars and aristocrats graced her decks. Salvador Dali was a frequent passenger. And when David Bowie sailed on the France, he gave an impromptu performance for the crew. She once even transported the Mona Lisa to New York for an American tour. But then came the jet age and supersonic transatlantic airline crossings. And when fuel prices rose, the SS France and many other liners simply became too expensive to sail.
She was too big to be a cruise ship at the time. Cruise ships were maybe a fifth the size, the typical cruise ship of that era. But NCL came along, bought the ship, completely rebuilt her for warm weather cruising, made the cabins much larger, and they renamed her SS Norway, and she became a smash.
The Norway sailed the Caribbean as a mass-market cruise ship for another 2 decades. But time took its toll. In a state of growing disrepair, the once Grand Ocean liner was given a surprise inspection by the U.S. Coast Guard, which found more than 100 safety violations. The ship was immediately grounded, but then the cruise line made a deal. If the company fixed most of the major violations, it asked the Coast Guard to let it continue to sail. In return, the cruise line promised to sail the ship out of U.S. waters permanently and to never return by the end of September 2001. But then came 9/11, and the world's attention went elsewhere. The Norway continued to sail out of Florida, and then, less than 2 years later, while sitting at the port in Miami, some of the violations came home to roost.
A deadly boiler explosion aboard a cruise ship in Miami. The SS Norway had just docked yesterday.
A massive boiler explosion aboard the ship killed 8 crew members.
Deferred maintenance and everybody thinking it'll be fine, and then this awful explosion. But it just would have been too costly to rebuild the ship and bring her back into service. So they offered her for sale, and the only people that came along with money were the shipbreakers in India.
And it had another name yet again.
Yes, Blue Lady, which was her nickname when she sailed as the Norway because she had a beautiful coat of blue on her hull. So she was affectionately called the Blue Lady, but in the end it ended up being a very sad, it's a name that people now think of negatively because that's what she was called when she sat on that beach in India being torn to shreds.
It was a sad end to a ship that once set the standard for ocean liner elegance. It's fascinating to me that, there's always that story that it's bad luck to rename a ship.
I think it's myths because some ships have had many, many lives and never had an incident, and then others have had only one name, Titanic, for instance, and had terrible luck. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Old ships are fine as long as they're maintained properly.
And old ships tell stories.
Absolutely.
It's one thing to rename an old ship and sail it again for paying passengers, but sometimes a renamed cruise ship finds a wildly different purpose. This ship, it's now called the Freewinds. A typical cruise ship? Hardly. It's had quite a history. The ship was first built more than 47 years ago and named the Bohème. It was one of the first modern cruise ships to be based in the port of Miami for year-round cruise service, a pioneer, in fact, for sea trips to the Caribbean. But in 1986, she was quietly sold to new owners and renamed the Freewinds. But you can't buy a cabin on this ship. Its passengers have to be invited. The owners? The Church of Scientology. And where it goes and what it does remains a closely guarded secret. In the cruise industry, part of the mythology is about romance at sea. And part of the history is about the stories that are hardly ever told about these resurrected ghost ships.